Let's go, folks. We're diving in here, continuing to rank every hero pack based solely on the deck building cards in the back. Today, we're going to be looking at the pre-built aggression heroes. And again, we're going to be looking at all the cards in the pack, not just the aggression ones, for the deck building purposes and what they bring to the game. So let's dive right in because we got 5 heroes to cover. The first one up is Thor. Let's look at his allies first. He has Valkyrie, Hercules, and Heimdall. Let's be honest, Hercules is not going to make most decks. Heimdall's pretty neat and useful in a lot of situations. He is a high cost, so you kind of have to put that into balance, and he's going to work well with heroes that can afford to play him. But Valkyrie makes a ton of decks because she has a burst when she comes into play, and most of the time she's going to eliminate a minion and maybe even 2 right when she's played. So she's a great ally. So we're looking at 2 pretty good allies and 1 ally that has a very niche spot in the builds. The next one, we look at the key cards. And let's start with Under Surveillance, a.k.a. The Van. This card is beyond phenomenal. This card literally makes every single Justice deck I build in solo or 2-player because it is so useful and so vital and has saved me countless times. I cannot emphasize enough the power of Under Surveillance, particularly in solo play. So if you're going to be playing any amount of solo with Justice, you're going to want this card in there because it's going to be able to increase the threat threshold on the main scheme, and that's just going to save you a ton of headache and a ton of heartache and weird losses, because there's been several times where you just get in a situation where you have to flip to Alter Ego and you have no threat on the main scheme, so you think you're safe, then boom, you get hit with an advance, and next thing you know, you've lost the scenario. Also, this is a neat way to get around, increase the threat limit when there's a crisis icon out and you can't deal with it. I think it's crisis. Yeah, the one where you can't thwart because until you get rid of that side scheme. So cool way around it. Jarnbjorn, a great weapon resource that really kind of has a lot of unique builds, a lot of excitement to this card. There's a lot of heroes that synergize really well with this card. Just being able to pitch a physical card to do 2 damage after you attack, it can really increase some major damage, and there's just a lot of fun builds out there with it. Hall of Heroes, a good card. It's repeated in the Valkyrie pack. It's a card drawing card, and this is a card that I loved right off the bat, but over time I'm kind of back and forth of whether it's useful. Basically, if I'm not going to be using this at least twice within a game, so like multiplayer games, you're probably going to have it's probably going to be a lot more useful than in solo play. But if you're not triggering it at least twice to draw those 3 cards, a lot of times it's not worth the cost. So, but it definitely has its uniquenesses and builds. So especially if you are planning on being the minion slayer. Next up, we have Mean Swing, Battle Fury, Teamwork, and Enhanced Physique. And over here, tinily in the corner, is Get Over Here. So Mean Swing, that's a neat card, but you got to build around it. A 0 cost, so it's fun. I like that it's a part of the deck. Battle Fury, a great card, but you have to be aware. You got to be a hero that can take that damage so that you can ready and kind of really pump out the damage. So it has to be worth it. Is it worth taking a damage to ready to deal more damage? Teamwork, a great way to utilize some of those high attack, high thwart allies you get on the board without them taking consequential damage. And then this resource generator, when you just need physical, it's useful in certain builds when you really need the physical resource to be the primary function of your deck. And the Get Over Here, this card is very niche in its usefulness. Probably the best use for it is to get rid of stun. It's a 0 cost attack that can allow you to unstun yourself, which is one of the big hindrance if you're playing aggression is you want to be attacking. So there is that. But there's only 2 cards in the Thor deck, which there's a lot of times I want to build around this card, especially with Thor, to be able to get minions off other players, and only being 2, that was kind of interesting to me. that there was only 2. But again, this is building around certain heroes. For the most part, you don't want minions moving off one guy to the next guy. There's usually not a ton of usefulness to that unless you're Thor and you're trying to specifically get minions in front of you so you can lightning strike or something. So, very niche, plus you have to have aerial. But overall, what do we think of this pack? I give it an A. I think this card borderlines on B, but because of Under Surveillance, it definitely jumps to an A. Under Surveillance is top-notch card, and you need it. Jarnbjorn's fun, and the Heimdall, Valkyrie, fun allies, so it bumps it up to an A for sure. Without Under Surveillance, this is probably a B, but with it, it almost pushes it all the way to an S tier, like, I gotta have it. But good stuff here. Next, we have Hulk, so let's look at his allies, Brawn, Sentry, and She-Hulk. Brawn is an ally that's going to be included in a lot of deck builds because he gives you some attack and thwart. And something that's sometimes overlooked is he's a 5 health ally, so he can take some indirect damage or maybe just take a big punch for you if a villain has overkill or something. So Brawn, super useful. Sentry is a solid ally, but he scares me because he gives you an encounter card. Usually it's worth it, but I have a hard time getting over that. So because of that, he doesn't make a lot of decks. And on top of that, he costs 4. But he is a great ally. Plus, if you get him on the board and keep him on the board with first aids and things like that, and get some upgrades on him, he can really pump out some major damage and be super useful. She-Hulk, she's a 2 thwart aggression, which there's not a ton of those in the deck, so that makes her useful. And then on her way out, she can deal some damage and things like that. Honestly, she doesn't get used that much because she just costs too much for what she does, and I think there's better ways around it. So not that she doesn't make decks, but she's not making a ton of decks. So let's look at the key cards. Beat Cop, again, another Justice card in the back of the deck that I would venture to say is a top-notch card that you're going to want because it is so powerful. You get it on the board, and it just constantly helps you mitigate threat, constantly helps you, oh man, I just need 1 thwart here, and you can have 3 Beat Cops on the board. So this card can be super useful. And then the final blow sometimes is like, man, I'm in a pinch, and I really need to just take out this big, beefy minion in front of me. It has that versatility as well. So this card was a game changer when it came out, and I still think it makes a ton of decks because of that. Dropkick is very niche in a lot of the things it does, but it is 100% completely replaced Uppercut for me. I will probably never play an Uppercut because Dropkick exists, because the upside of possibly being able to stun and draw a card is way better than having that 1 extra attack. So this you got to play with all physical resources to kind of really get it to work. But the upside is just, it's there. So I use it in a lot of decks, especially a lot of rush decks and things like that. Toe-to-toe, fun event, does 1 damage, allows you to kind of deal 5 damage for 1 cost, which is great, but you got to take an attack. So you got to consider that. Martial Prowess, you can put it on any player. And since most players have an attack event in their hero kit somewhere, maybe even all of them. I think all of them do. This card to me is the most important of the resource generators for specific events. So I use this one more than Sense of Justice and even Nerves of Steel. So let's look at the honorable mentions in the pack. Electrical Static Armor, that's really good, particularly with Iron Man because it's a tech, or if you're trying to build a deck where it deals a bunch of damage. It doesn't get included in a lot of decks just because it is kind of niche of what you're trying to build. Inspiring Presence, again, this is a fine card. It's just niche. Resourcefulness, having that wild resource and trying to play with those, this card's kind of cool. It's got some neat things you can do with it. If you play it, you're not going to be mad you have it, because in a pinch, sometimes you just need that 1 resource and you can bank it for the future. Or, more importantly, what I usually use these for is just having the wild resource in my hand to be able to trigger whatever it is I need to trigger, whether it's getting an attachment off the villain or something. That's where it comes in a lot. You'll pay for that. This is a thwart event I almost never use, but it is there, and one cost to potentially take 5 threat off a scheme. I see the value, but most of the time I just don't want to be taking that much damage anyways, and I would rather find better ways to thwart. So overall, what do I think? I give this an A, where I love it. And the game changers for me were Drop Kick, Beat Cop, and those allies are pretty solid as well. And Martial Prowess is one that gets a lot of use as well. All right, diving into Wasp. The Wasp pack. Let's look at the allies first. We have Thor, Jane Foster Thor, Wasp, Spider-Man, and Ironheart. And I'm going to talk about 3 of these in particular. Wasp, a phenomenal aggression ally. For 1 cost, now it has to be a lightning, but for 1 cost you can get her into play to either do 3 damage, block, or block, just whatever you need. And if you can get more, spend up to 3 of those lightning, can stay around longer, can really generate a lot of damage output with her, or just be the chump blocker you need in the moment. The next thing we see is Spider-Man. Spider-Man has a burst when he enters play, where he can thwart or attack in a burst fashion, which there's some heroes that really just need that. They need to have somebody that can come in and take care of thwart for them. So that's usually what he comes and does, but say you need that attack, he's great. This guy makes a lot of decks. Ironheart being able to draw cards when she comes into play. So basically for 1 cost to get an ally out, boom. This is great, phenomenal card. Makes a ton of decks. Great deck building cards. And because Spider-Man and Ironheart are basic, means they can be included into any deck. So they get slotted into a lot of decks. Lady Thor, or Jane Foster Thor, if you will. She's useful. She's kind of expensive. She doesn't make a lot of decks for me, but she does have some usefulness. Next, let's look at the key cards in the deck. Power in All of Us, which is the double resource card for basic cards. Now, it has to be a basic card, but this card has single-handedly changed how you can deck build. You can deck build leaning into some of those higher cost basic cards like Quinn Carrier, Avengers Mansion, even Heimdall, whether it's some of these more expensive allies. And so for me, this card is a must-have. Like, this card really gives you some power, gives you some opportunities to increase the economy of your deck building. Boot Camp's really solid, fun card. Usually you're building it around that card if you're trying to do some cool stuff with that. Into the Fray, this is another card it's repeated in another pack, but it's great. It's one of the best thwarting cards in aggression, or it might be the best thwarting card. Now granted, it has to come off the main scheme, but and I say thwarting, it's not even a thwart, it's an attack. So you can play this card even if you're confused. So you deal 6 damage to an enemy, and how much ever you dealt in excess, it removes threat. Great card to keep you in the game, especially as an aggression player. So this gets included in a lot of decks because you want to be killing minions, and you might as well get the added bonus of removing threat as well. So the next one is Surprise Attack. Now, this card gets included in a lot of my rush decks, but there's a lot of heroes now that do a lot of form flipping. Spectrum, Wasp, Ant-Man, Vision now. So you can trigger this surprise attack off of that, and so there's a lot of cool integrations. But 1 cost for 3 to 4 damage, that's a great cost curve for this card. So love this card. Got good value out of that. So honorable mentions: Perseverance, Lionway, and Quinn Carrier. Quinn Carrier is in the Black Widow pack, and I think the War Machine pack as well. Quinn Carrier for Avengers, being able to generate that wild resource, super good, because sometimes you just need that wild resource in order to get an attachment off the board. Or, oh man, I've got the 1 mental, but I needed 2 mental so I can use this. Or I needed to have the physical so I can make drop kick work correctly. So having this extra resource on the board is super valuable, and the fact that it generates a resource and not reduce a cost means you can play it on the villain turn to trigger hero interrupts on the villain turn. So that's really neat. Love this card. This is included in most Avenger builds, but it also depends on if you're Avenger and if somebody else in the game hasn't already played the Quinn Carrier. So we have Lion Weight. It's a preparation card, 3 damage to a minion, so kind of allows you to set up. So 1 cost for 3 damage, but the best thing is you can wait for the minion you want this to be used on. Great card. Perseverance, cheap way to get tough on your heroes, and a lot of your protection builds, you're going to want to be tough and protecting yourself because you want to try to stay in hero form a lot of times when you're playing protection, and this card is one of the ways that you can do that. So overall, what do I give this? I give it the grade of S. Gotta have it. This is a gotta have it pack, particularly for Power in All of Us. The Power in All of Us and Ironheart. Just the allies, just all the allies. The Ironheart, Wasp, Spider-Man, just phenomenal. Plus, you got the bonus of Into the Fray, Quinn Carrier's in there. Oh, man, this pack has a ton of great deck-building cards in it, and you won't go wrong by adding Wasp pack to your deck because of the deck-building cards that comes with it. Next, we see Gamora. So Gamora only has 2 allies, which honestly is kind of disappointing because I think that's a detriment to this pack because Angela's repeated in another pack. I think the Valkyrie pack now has her, and usually it's very niche builds that you're using Angela in. And there's nothing worse than putting her on the board and then whiffing and not finding a minion and she just disappears and you've just wasted a resource. And then Drax, very limited uses with Drax, particularly you have to be a Guardian to play him. So the allies in this pack aren't the greatest. There are deck building you can do with them, so I don't hate them, but they're very very niche and very specific, so not the best. Then we have the key cards Clobber, Hit First, Impede, and Godslayer. So Impede and Clobber do something really cool is if they're the first cards you play, they come back to your hand. So essentially, they end up costing 1 less because you kind of get that resource back where you can even play that card twice in the single round. So that's really cool. The issue that I have with Impede specifically, and the reason that it doesn't get included in a lot of deck builds, is it's from the main scheme only. I missed that when I first got the card, and there's a lot of times where I got to take out a Crisis Icon side scheme, and I won't be able to use this card, meaning it won't be the first card I play. So I don't like Impede. I think there's better cards out there than Impede because of that. Clobber is great. I use that a ton in deck building. Being able to deal those 3 damage, get it back, and pump that resource into something else is great. So essentially 1 cost for 3 damage, good value. Hit First. I like the versatility of this card. I think it brings something cool to protection builds and things like that. So it's fine. And Godslayer, it's another weapon upgrade, 2 damage to a unique, and I think all of our villains so far are unique characters. Maybe not, but I'm pretty sure all of them. There might be a time when that's not the case, but Godslayer, 2 extra damage, but you have to exhaust to do your basic attack, and there's not everybody's using their basic attack. Usually, though, you are if you're playing aggression, so it's a good card. It's there is a lot of joy in this card, and there's a lot of deck building around it, but it being 3 cost a lot of times makes me double think when it's actually in my deck. Man, do I really want to play this, or is there something else I'd rather do or have to do? But there is value in that card, and so let's look at some honorable mentions. Hit and Run, True Grit, Comms Implant, and Pivotal Moment. Hit and Run is honestly not a great card in a lot of builds, but I love it. I do find usefulness in a lot of builds because 3 costs, man, I got to do damage and thwart. I got minions out here, and I got threat I got to deal with. So I kind of like that card, and a lot of times I will slot this card in there, in particularly if I'm building a basic focus deck with the Power in All of Us. makes it a little bit cheaper, and the value I think's there. This is way better than a To the Rescue or a Haymaker. It's basically both of those things at the same time. So I like it okay. True Grit kind of gives you some thwarting ability, which is something you really struggle with when you're playing protection. Comms Implant, another way to upgrade some allies, particularly Guardian allies, so fun ways to play that. Pivotal Moment almost never gets played, but it is a damage card in the Justice build, so it's there. But honestly, there are better, I think, cards out there that deal damage in the Justice build, but that one exists. So here we go. The final grade, we give it a C. It's fine. It's a little niche. Really, what hurts this pack the most, I think, is the lack of solid allies in it. There's some decent deck building cards in here, but for the most part, there's nothing in here that I would miss if I didn't have it a part of my collection. So I think this is fine. So on to Valkyrie. Valkyrie has 3 allies: Thor, Throg, and Angela. Valkyrie was actually one of those heroes I was on the cusp of, should I actually purchase her or not? And it was Throg and Thor that put me over the top to purchase this pack, because Throg, just a 2-cost ally. Hey, and plus it's Throg. It's a fun frog, a fun Thor frog, and so the thematics of it was just fun to me. Plus he can come out with a tough and give you some blocks in there, and so he's a lot of fun. Thor, I see a bunch of usefulness in him coming into play, particularly minion-heavy scenarios where he can really go to town, taking care of some minions for you. Angela, again, repeat from earlier. And so let's look at the key cards. Quick Strike, Smash the Problem, and the Best Defense. So these cards kind of work similarly. It kind of gives us a new archetype or a new strategy within the aggression build, and that is build your attack stat as high as you possibly can, and then use these cards to do different things based on that. You can deal damage off of it, you can smash the problem, and it can kind of become a thwart with your high attack value. It can become the defense when you need it, so it kind of gives us a new archetype. So these kind of work together and are fun. And then we have Godlike Stamina. There's only 2 players that can play this card, but it's a phenomenal card. So if you like Thor and you like Valkyrie, there's literally almost no reason to not include these cards, because they're basic, because it removes a status card. That's the most important thing. It removes a status card, and you heal on top of that. A lot of times Valkyrie and Thor want to be staying in hero form anyway, so this is almost like a must-have in most of those builds. So love that card, but again, it's very specific to 2 heroes that we have in the game currently. So let's look at some honorable mentions. Cosmic Alliance, Anticipation, Leadership Training, and the Bifrost. Cosmic Alliance, I think this card is going to get a lot of usefulness. It's particularly in multiplayer games. It's going to ready 2 heroes, maybe an ally, but for the most part, it's probably going to be heroes for 3 cost, and you can share that cost. I see a lot of value in this card. I think this card has a lot of play, and potentially it has some play even in solo play, because it's only 3 costs, so there are some options there. And so I think this card is good for deck building. Anticipation, preparation card, so that helps Black Widow. So it's got some fun things where you can ready when a minion engages you. So I can see that being helpful in a protection build. But I feel like you almost have to build around it a little bit. Leadership Training, fine. It's a fine card. You can probably live without it, but it does create some deck building possibilities where you're recycling some of those fun event cards. And then the Bifrost honestly doesn't have a lot of usefulness, because we don't have a ton of Asgard A, heroes, and B, a ton of Asgard allies. I mean, there's some, so usually you're going to be playing aggression because that's where most of them are found at this moment. But at the very least, it's going to provide you a resource. So it's all right. I don't hate this, but I think it's gonna be kind of niche in its usefulness. So overall, what is my assessment? I'm gonna give this one a B. And the reason I'm gonna give it a B is because it bumps it up a little bit, because Throg is just so cool. It's a little niche in how it's built because this is going to work well with heroes that really want to build up their basic stat line, their basic attack stat. There's just really nothing in here that's mind-blowing, but it is fun because it's a new way to build aggression. And so I think that's valuable, and that's a cool thing that it's bringing to the game. So, overall ranking, we have Wasp is 1, Hulk is 2, Thor is 3, Valkyrie is 4, and Gamora is 5. So that's how I would probably prefer to buy these cards if I was purchasing them, based solely on the deck building. Again, this is solely on the deck building, nothing to do with the heroes themselves, but just the deck building potential within the pack. Wasp, with the power in all of us, Ironheart, just the allies that come in her deck, just takes her over the top for me. Hulk, that beat cop is really cool. On top of that, he's got the drop kicks and some pretty cool aggression allies in his deck. Thor, under surveillance, bar none. And then Valkyrie kind of gives you a new way to build, but it's okay. And then Gamora, honestly, is one that you could probably not have and be okay with it, because there's nothing in that card deck that's mind-blowing, and in particular, the allies really hurt her. So that's my ranking. Let me know what you think, and we'll continue this another day.